Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our presentation of Building Blocks to Successful Collaborations. This is Jamie Machik with the Nicolay Federated Library System. And this afternoon we have Jean Anderson, who's a continuing education consultant with the South Central Library System, presenting for us. So, Jean, whenever you are ready, feel free to go ahead and get started.
Okay. Thanks, Jamie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Jamie for inviting me to talk about successful collaborations today. And I'm not going to present myself as a complete expert in this, but Steph Morrill, the director of Wills, and I did a presentation on this at the Lake Superior Library Symposium last June, and we're doing it again in Wapple next week. So if you are heading to Wapple next week, you'll hear a little bit of a repeat, some of the same concepts, but we do have different pictures for the slideshow next week. So for today's short introduction to this topic, I'm going to tell you how to build successful collaborations by telling you a few things not to do. So I hope you enjoy it. I picked some good pictures, and I think it will be fun along the way. So this is just a bear saying hello, so I like the picture. So this little girl is a sculpture from a train station in Gothenburg, Sweden. I took her picture a couple years ago when we were there. And I'm not sure exactly what she's supposed to be doing in the train station, but I think she looks very sad. And I decided that for today's presentation, she is what happens when no one ever wants to work with her again. So here's what you have to do in order to look like her. And by no one, I'm referring to people and organizations. So the first thing you have to do is be negative. The first words that you should say when asked to collaborate or to help with a project should be a very firm no. No way, no how. You should not say yes, and how can I help? Or yes, and how do you think we can accomplish that? Or yes, and how much do you think that will cost? And how can we raise the money? And if you didn't pick up on the yes and concept, I had an improv workshop here at South Central last year, and I learned quite a bit, including yes and. So even if you're going to say no, yes and can get you there. Another way to be negative is to criticize the project idea, the people involved, not to their face, of course, and criticize the project, the people, or any other thing that you can think of. You could say things like, that'll never work in our small community, or we tried that before and it didn't work, or yeah, right, that'll happen. An alternative you can say is maybe, while not meaning it at all, and showing in your body language and your tone of voice, like, yeah, maybe, like that'll happen, something like that. You can, a lot of your negativity can come across in your body language and your tone of voice. Another thing that you can do is to be indirect. Don't deal with things directly. For example, you could be frustrated with someone and not say anything. I am good at this. It's also good to expect others to be able to read your mind. I am very good at doing this, especially with my husband, and I'm surprised after 26 years that he hasn't figured out how to read my mind yet, but we often expect this of other people. We might be frustrated because we're too nice. We feel like we're being taken advantage of. And again, I'm particularly guilty of this. I often say yes. I say, well, sure, I can do that, and not realize it doesn't really fit in with my schedule. But because I said yes, I want to follow through on it and do it. And then if I'm not appreciated, which we're going to talk about it in a little bit, or acknowledged in some way, I'm going to be frustrated, feel like I'm being taken advantage of, and then without any warning, I'm going to say, I'm done, you're taking advantage of me, and I'm not going to tell them that they're taking advantage of me. I'm just going to say, oh, I'm done, see you later. Another way to be indirect is if you feel like you're not being useful to the collaboration, can be another reason for being frustrated. You can feel like your collaborators are devaluing your contribution, and you'll hear more about this in a few minutes. For collaborations to be successful, you need to set boundaries and be clear about expectations on both sides of the collaboration. And that means sometimes you have to say to the other person, this isn't working for me, or I can do this but not right now, something like that. And telling people your collaborators, partners, is about your frustration is okay as long as it's done in a positive and constructive way. And your tone of voice will go a long ways in making this a positive conversation. So this is something I learned in the Crisis Prevention Institute training that I do. There's one phrase, and I'm going to say it for you. I didn't say you were stupid. So I said that without any inflection. So it's I didn't say you were stupid. So I'm going to say this in a couple different ways. And you can tell basically by my tone of voice and the inflection on different words how that comes across to other people. I didn't say you were stupid. 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 And if you listen to all of those, you can see how the meaning changes of each of those sentences just based on the word that I emphasized. So communication, of course, is very important in building any of these successful collaborations and partnerships. And I'm not going to focus on it very much today other than, you'll hear a little bits and pieces about it in each of the concepts that we're talking about. But how you communicate with others and their perception of how you communicate is key. It wastes our time, energy, and productivity to be indirect. And there's my other piece of paper. There was an article that I read recently, and it was about using your phone as a watch. And I don't know how many of you do that, but when I got a cell phone, especially my smartphone, I stopped wearing a watch because I had my phone with me all the time. I used my phone. So I would grab my phone out of my pocket, check the time, and either say, I need to leave or whatever. That was my phone or my clock. But so if you were talking to someone and they pulled their phone out of their pocket or their wallet and looked at it, what do you think they're doing? And you can go ahead and feel free to type in the chat or in the questions, what do you think, what's your perception of what people are doing when they get their phone out of their pocket?
Well, I automatically assume they are texting or checking to see if someone wrote to them. Patty says checking Facebook. I do that too.
We all do that, and it may be that you're taking your phone out just to check the time.
Chatting online, trying to find something more interesting than me.
Yes. Yes, anything. And that last set, how will you say that again? That last one,
trying to find something more interesting than me.
Exactly. And when you do that, and we're going to talk about this in just a second as well, but I love this watch phone analogy, is you are not present with that person, or at least their perception of it is that you're not direct, you're not communicating with them directly, your attention is somewhere else. So think about that when you use your phone as a watch.
Did the article talk about that we shouldn't do this? Like we should wear a watch, or
well,
did it suggest anything else? Or should you preface looking at your phone with saying to the person, "I'm sorry, I'm just I'm just checking the time." Is that acceptable? I guess I don't know.
I don't know either. And this was I subscribed to this newsletter called Manager Tools, and it's a subscription-based thing for other things, but this is their free newsletter. And they often they talk about watches evidently when you go to interviews and how you're perceived with you wearing a watch versus taking your phone out to look at the time. And I don't have access to that article, but this little newsletter, she says, when you look at, and I'm quoting from her newsletter, it says, when you look at your phone, the person you're talking to thinks you're doing email or text, and that hurts the relationship. It's basically saying that whatever is on the phone is more important than the person in front of you. I know that's not what you're thinking, you're just checking the time, but that's what the other person is hearing. And as they say at their conferences, communication is what the listener does, so it's all on the receiver's end. So it might not be what you intended, but that's what they're receiving. So, and I don't know if I can send you the link to that, but I'll put that quote in my notes. I'll add that to the slides.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So those were great responses because I didn't realize I was doing that as well. So, okay. So another way to not have to have someone never ever want to work with you again is to not share. And I love this picture. There are two ways to go about this. Never ask for or take help. Give the perception that you don't need people. Or never do any of the work. Make other people do everything, which may make others frustrated with you if they're too nice, if you think back to the previous slide. When you reach out to someone for help, view it as honoring the connection, not as taking advantage. As librarians, we're in a helping profession, and respecting that help that others want to offer is important. And I would about this, if we offer to help someone with a project or whatever, it's something within our area of expertise, and they say no, or they want to do it themselves or whatever, it kind of makes you feel a little bit bad, a little bit like they're not quite valuing you and whatnot. So, and we're going to talk about that in the next slide, but I was making that connection that if you are offering your help and it's always denied, you're going to stop offering, so it's a way of accepting help is also really important, I think, for us as building collaborations. And I know, because it's hard for me sometimes to accept help as well, it's hard for all of us, I think, at different times. It can be really hard for some of us to accept help or even ask for help. And it may be seen as a weakness, but I think it's really a strength in that we don't have the expertise and the skills to do everything. And that's part of the reason for building collaborations and partnerships is finding the people who have skills and strengths that you don't and bringing them all together. So being able to share and ask for help and accept help, I think, is really important. Finding ways to undercut someone's value. We mentioned this just a little bit, and I think this is really important, and it's often not done intentionally, and sometimes it is. So here's an example of what I mean by undercutting someone's value. So for example, at a weekly staff meeting, someone suggests a project, and we're going to use Harry Potter as my characters. So Harry volunteers to take on this task. And then Ron suggests that maybe Hermione might be a better person to do this job because, of course, Hermione knows everything. But then Hermione says, I don't have time to do that. It's not worth my time to do this. So then Harry responds, well, if it's not worth Hermione's time, why is it worth my time? So by Hermione saying that it wasn't worth her time to do this, and somebody else suggesting Harry to do that, why is it it's worth Harry's time but not worth Hermione's? So it's kind of one of those things that sometimes you don't realize what you say, what the effect is on the other person. Another way to undercut someone's value is corporate bragging. And this is where you're insisting that you are busier than everyone else. And this is when we were talking about the watch and the perception with the watch, this goes along with that concept as well. So when we say that we are constantly saying that we are too busy, it implies that our time is more important than anybody else's. And actually, it's become a form of competition. And if anyone else follows the Ask a Manager blog, a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, they had a question about being busy. And there were two articles that were referenced in there. One was The Busy Trap by Tim Kreider. I think it was an opinion in the New York Times, and they have a link to it in the resources slide. And what he says is, the busy trap, busy, so busy, and crazy busy have become boasts disguised as complaints. So we want people to know how busy we are and that we don't have time to do this. And if we're saying that when people are right there with us, why would they want to do anything with us? If we're so, why do they have time for us if they're so busy doing anything else? And the name of the blog was Ask a Manager. And I'll see if I can type it in. Nope, it won't let me. If you look up askamanager.com, you'll find it. Okay. And it's really good. I highly recommend it. Oh, go back a slide. Another way to undercut someone's value is it can be simple things like not matching vocabulary, talking about degrees and accomplishments or your position, especially if you're in a position of power, being dismissive of others, whether their values or hobbies, or critical of those values or hobbies. And our goal in creating successful collaborations, of course, is to find common ground. So it's, I think, important not to undercut other people's values. this next slide about keep your distance. What I'm talking about here is keeping your distance both physically and emotionally. And this goes back to the don't share slide. If you're keeping your distance, it means not sharing back when someone shares something with you. And when we talk about building relationships, or building collaborations, when you're getting to know somebody, you're sharing little bits of yourself. I'm a librarian, I'm from Madison, you're a librarian, you're from somewhere else, and you meet and you start those things, and if you're not sharing back an equal amount or similar amount to what the other person is sharing with you, you're distancing yourself from them, and that relationship and collaboration isn't going to grow if you don't have that sharing of information. Keeping yourself apart by not actively or wholeheartedly participating in whatever function happens to be going on. So for example, if you're in a meeting, in a some sort of social function or something like that, if you are emailing, texting, IMing during the meeting, checking your watch, even though it might be or checking your phone to check your time, but everybody thinks you're checking your email. If you're paying only partial attention to what's going on around you, people are going to see that you're not engaged, that you're keeping your distance from what's going on around you. You're multitasking. You appear to be busy all the time, but not with what's going on in the room around you. These activities all signal your lack of engagement, and you're not present with what's going on. And presence and engagement are the key words here. Presence is a continuum. So on one end, you have completely disengaged, and you're unaware of what's going on around you. So for example, you're riding the bus, you've got your headphones on, and you're completely ignoring everything that's going on around you. On the other end is a transformative presence, where it's a meaningful interaction that touches the lives of those involved in a unique and profound manner. And this is from the book Click, and I have a reference to this on the last slide. And in our daily lives, we're often somewhere in the middle. I think the transformative presence probably doesn't happen very often, except for in our most intimate, deep relationships. This is my favorite one, proselytize, mostly because it's the one I am the most uncomfortable with. So what I mean by proselytize is to force your views on others. And those views could be about anything: corporate values, sustainability, fitness, diet, and exercise, etc. The proselytizer has made a choice that their values and making sure that others agree with those values is more important than their relationships. This makes others feel inadequate or uncomfortable, which goes back to undermining value. And if you can start to see, all of these things are connected. And I was thinking about this earlier because this is one of the things that really turns me off. If this characteristic is in somebody that I meet, I'm not likely to pursue that relationship because that's just not something I want to be associated with. So here's an example of what I mean by proselytizing, and I'll do this from my life. So I've been attending a boot camp workout group for almost 3 years, and I really love it. And if you ask me about it, I will gladly tell you all about it. I get up before 5, 4 days a week, and I go for a 45-minute workout that is really, really hard. It's made a really big difference in my life. It's really important to me. But only if you ask me will I tell you about it. Now, if I were a proselytizer, here's what I would be saying. Ready? You have got to try this boot camp class that I've been going to. It is awesome. I think you would love it, and it's not that expensive. I know you're a runner, but the boot camp workout is so much better and better for you. I know you have other commitments, but I think this would really help you be more focused at work. It's not so much the content so much as the constant, and I'm putting this in quotes, selling of whatever is working for me, and I think would obviously work for you too. So to me, that's one of those things that if somebody does it to me, I'm out of there. It's going to be hard to change my mind after that. It's one thing to be excited about something that's really important to you and wanting to share it with others, and it's another to go overboard and force it down their throats. It just turns people off, makes them uncomfortable, and want to run away as fast as possible. Here comes one of my favorite pictures. I hope you all are going, aw. So this one is never tell people their value to you. What I mean by this is keep all that information to yourself. Maybe share it once a year if you're a supervisor or a director at performance evaluation time for your employees. Your employees, potential partners, friends, and others don't need to know that information. I'm sure they'll continue to do their best work for you with or without that knowledge. And this goes actually back to the don't share slide. So the next information that I'm going to say comes from the book 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace by Paul White. And you might recognize the beginning of that title because it's the co-author is the same one who did the 5 Languages of Love books. So early in the book, Paul White says that this is what happens when relationships are not nurtured by a sense of appreciation. When you hear these next statements, replace the words team members, employees, and workers with collaborators, partners, co-workers, and others that you might have relationships or collaborations with. When not appreciated, team members will experience a lack of connectedness with others and with the mission of the organization. Workers will tend to become discouraged, feeling there is always more to do and no one appreciates what I'm doing. Often, employees will begin to complain about their work, their colleagues, and their supervisor. Eventually, team members will start to think seriously about leaving the organization, and they begin to search for other employment. Excuse me. And when you think about searching for other employment, and what we're talking about today, they're searching for other people to develop collaborations and partnerships with. So if you don't appreciate the partners, the co-workers, the collaborators, they're not going to stay around for very long. So this is wrong. Don't do any of these things. If you're doing any of these things, turn around and go back and do the opposite of all of these. Be positive. Be direct. Share. Show someone their value to you. Engage with others. Don't proselytize. And be sure to tell your partners, coworkers, and others how much you appreciate and value their relationships with you. We all do these things at one time or another in our lives. And my hope is that by thinking about them today, we can work on changing some of our behaviors and start creating some great collaborations and partnerships in our libraries and communities. And I do have 2 words that I want to leave you with as we go forward. The first is genuineness, or being authentic. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, I think. If I didn't, it's kind of implied in everything that I was saying. If you think about all the things that I've been talking about so far, being genuine and authentic in your interactions with others eliminates, I think, many of the negative aspects that I was talking about. This also, when you're being genuine, I think also needs to be aware of the perceptions of others. So when you are being authentic and real, you are also looking for that same characteristic in others. And depending on the interaction, if you're in an interview, you're going to have a different level of being genuine than if you're talking to a friend or someone that you know quite well. So it'll still be authentic and genuine, it'll just be more formal in that type of interaction. And I think being self-aware, being able to read people, figure out if what you're saying is coming across the way that you want based on the recipient's body language and things like that is important. And a quick example of this, in a library that I used to work at many years ago, there was one of my coworkers who, very nice person, a little bit too nice in my books. And what I mean by that was it always seemed false. She was always super friendly, over the top friendly, way too nice, always had a smile, never seemed to have a bad day. And that just was not real to me. And there was nothing wrong with her. You know, it was just one of those things that kind of turned me the wrong way. And I just thought, you know, this is nice, I'll work with her, I'll be polite and whatnot, but that relationship would never have gone any farther because of that. And I think most of us can read people, and if we're genuine and we expect genuineness on the part of others, it'll all be good. This is the picture I was telling Jamie about earlier. This is probably the biggest keyword for today, and that is trust. And trust is it's probably the most important piece of this puzzle. It's at the core of all of successful collaborations, partnerships, and relationships. And it starts really small. It starts with when you meet someone else, you're genuine, you're positive, you're engaged with them, you've started building trust. And as that relationship and collaboration deepens and becomes more successful, you've got more and more trust built on this. And I think doing what we say we're going to do, following through on our actions, being genuine and authentic in all of our interactions with our potential partners and collaborators builds trust, which will build successful collaborations and partnerships. So that is my presentation today. This picture I think is really funny too. I took this picture in Uppsala. We happened to be there on a day that some sort of Comic-Con type thing was getting started, so there were people in costumes everywhere, which was really fun. Isn't that great?
I do. I like that picture. So we're just about out of time, but if anyone has any questions or comments that you want to run past the group on anything Jean talked about, and she's also putting up her resource page, and as I mentioned, the slides will be available and sent to you afterwards if you want to look more into any of these. One thing that I just wanted to mention, I like the what was the proselytizer? Yeah, I like that, and the example that first came to my mind, especially when you mentioned kind of proselytizing your political beliefs, maybe like on Facebook or something, and and that is something I used to be guilty of. I used to post, stuff from here and there, and then I kind of just decided, I got to a point where I'm like, you know what, I'm just going to keep these things to myself, or now you can create a list of people that only see certain things, and I've just found that to be, I think, a lot better. I think that's something that I think not just, via the social media Facebook platform, but I think those things can, like you said, ruin a lot of relationships and collaborations anyway. So I think for me,
before they get started too.
Before they get started, right. Yeah. So I think for me, just not saying anything or just deciding to not post anything politically related, to my page personally, that I think that was just for me, it was just a wise decision, and that it was more important to not do that than to ruin a bunch of relationships, I guess, or just to turn people off, is kind of what you're doing. So that's what I thought of when you were talking about that.
Yeah, I thought about that too, and I purposely didn't pick a political one because I thought everybody would know what I was talking about with this one.
Yeah, and I know you talked about at the beginning, when one way to not build relationships is to say no all the time. But then sometimes what happens is that you say yes, and then you realize that either you don't have the time or it doesn't fit into your schedule or this or that. So I'm wondering, and maybe some other people who are still listening in want to chime in on this as well, and you can type a response in your question box. I'm just curious. So what happens when you do say yes to something and then you realize, hey, I really can't do this, I don't have the time for this, and then you have to say no? Does that jeopardize the relationship in some way? Is that person going to ask you again to do something? What happens there? If you say yes, should you just suck it up and continue on, so to speak? I mean, what happens to that relationship then if you truly have to turn around and let's say it's something, it's not that you're being late. It's not that you're being lazy or don't like the person or that, but just you legitimately you're just in over your head, and you have to turn it down, and you said yes too quickly. So what happens to that relationship then, and how do you repair that, or do you repair it?
Well, I think it depends on how you handle it. And when you say yes and, you can also say yes and, but have it be a negative. In a way, you could say, yes, I think that's a great idea, and I don't have time right now, but if you ask me in 6 months, I could do it. Something like that. So you could validate whatever the project is or the request is and say, I'm really excited about this, and did you think about somebody else, if somebody else might be a better fit or have time to do it? So you could do something like that. in terms of damaging the relationships, if you do it right, it won't. That's where being authentic and having built the level of trust and whatnot comes into play. And if you say it in a way that you are still valuing the collaboration and the partnership, and going forward, you still want to have that relationship, the project, whatever it is, go forward, that'll come through if you're being authentic and have built that level of trust. So, because there are times when, with things outside of our control, that we get in over our head and have to back off of something. But if you do it right, it can still be a successful relationship.
And I think it's also a matter of how you communicate that information. So I think in that case, either a phone call or a face-to-face would be better than shooting off a quick email or a text like, oh, well, by the way, I can't do this. So I think that could have a lot to do with it as well. But I see this happening quite a bit in our profession. Like, we're just, not to use the busy word again, but it's true. I mean, we're all asked to do more with less, asked to serve in our communities, serve on committees, do other things, and there comes a time where you might have to say no, and I wonder if that's hard for people in our profession, just because we always want to do everything for everybody. So I don't know.
Yes, and we're nice people. We are
nice people.
So there was this is a personal anecdote from when I was in college. So I had a roommate, and we got along pretty well till towards the end of the year. And I was being my nice, normal self, and towards the end of the time that we spent together, was feeling completely taken advantage of and whatnot. And our relationship ended horribly. And I kind of regret that. We've made up just a teeny bit now, like 25 plus years later. But, but it was one of those things that if I had said something earlier on in the relationship of how the behavior was making me feel, it would have ended a lot differently. And, in hindsight, of course, it's 2020, but it also taught me that I needed to be a little bit more assertive in some things and be able to say no or say yes, I think that's great and I would love to work with you. However, I can't right now, but if you ask me in 6 months, I might be able to, something like that where you have to take care of yourself as well. So.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jean, for, again, this was a lot of great information. I love the resources. I love talking about this kind of stuff. Sheila says, thank you. Fantastic program, practical and focus. And these principles apply to so many areas in our professional lives, and I agree. So as I mentioned, the recording, the slides will be available to you. This is the final webinar on the Nicolay schedule for spring. We'll have a bunch of new stuff coming up in summer and fall, so watch for that on with PubLib. We always love seeing all of you. So again, thank you, Jean. Thank you, everyone, for listening in. Hope you have a great rest of your day and week, and hopefully spring will be here soon.
Hopefully. Thanks, Jamie.
Right.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.